Hello, it's Ren Presents time. I'm your host, Ren, and today we continue with the House of Bloodstein, Mentralysis, Part 3, Chapter 3, The Blood Box. So, as an author, I tend to be sort of a mercurial person with a great number of passing interests. And a few years ago, I wanted to create a creepypasta. You know, those weird, disquieting stories you see on the internet. Just a modern take on a horror story slash urban legend, only amped up to 11 to shock a modern audience. Horror stories, ghost stories, what have you, always have to ratchet it up a little bit just to get that shock value going, because each successive generation is harder to shock. So you got stories like, the first that comes to mind is Slender Man. God, there's a ton of creepypastas. And then there's like the Suicide Game, the Red Rooms, all creepypastas. And they're usually horribly written and full of aren't really stories necessarily, just sort of a setup for a story, you know, because the characters really don't react like people. There's really no rhyme or reason to the story other than to scare you. Well, I wanted to throw my hat in the ring, create my own creepypasta, much better written, of course, since I'm doing it. I came up with the idea of these monsters called the Menks. I used to, when I get home from work, I'd strap on my inline skates and I'd skate around 20 miles a day. There was an old train track they had paved over that went from the town of Xenia to the town of Yellow Springs. And if you know about Ohio, which is fairly conservative, Yellow Springs is this bastion of ultra-liberalism surrounded in a uterine fold of conservatism. It's kind of weird. Then the beating heart of that is Antioch University. The skating path would go right past Antioch, and the main building there looks something like you'd see in ancient Transylvania. It could be Dracula's castle. Just this main building, and along the path you always see a lot of weird things, and there was a plaque there that said Medway, you know, the birthplace of Tecumseh. And if you're from Ohio, you know who Tecumseh is. He was supposed to have been born one arrow shot away from Medway, which is right along the skating path. Usually in the fall I'd get caught in the dark as I skated back to my car. There's no lights, no street lights, no houses or anything along this path, so it gets pitch black. But I knew the path so well, I could skate it in the dark. Well, whenever you'd get to Medway, I always swore there was a light coming from Medway, where Tecumseh was supposed to have been born. And I could see it in the distance. It's this bluish haze, distinguishable from the utter pitch blackness all around me. And if I would put my hand in front of my face, I could even see my hand, you know, against this backdrop of indistinct blue. But as you would get to Medway and pass it, there was no light, there were no street light, there was nothing. It was just as dark as everything else, but just from a distance you swear you'd see light. And it gave me the genesis of this idea of the Menks, these dwellers in the woods and the bowers of man's domain. There's a lot of backstory to Menks, and with my meandering thoughts, sometimes it goes one way, sometimes it goes the other, but generally, if you were in search of something, if you'd lost something and you were searching the woods for your item or whatever it is that you're searching for, and you happened to die in the woods, then you would come back as a Menk and roam the woods forever. Another thing about the Menks is the Menk treasure, where they had a tree that would ooze black pus instead of sap, and they would fill this tree full of junk, bits of old wood and cloth, old coins when they could get it, and their favorite was mirrors, and occasionally you would see the mirrors gleaming out of the tree, you know, way off in the distance. You'd see a light, and those were the Menk lights. And if you were to go to that tree and look in and see yourself, you would see yourself as a Menk, as a monster, and that that was called Menks sign, which means you are going to become a Menk at some point. And sometimes you were born with Menks sign, that anytime you'd see your reflection in a mirror, you would see yourself as a monster. And sooner or later, you are fated to become a Menk. And another way that Menks would get you is if you're traveling on the edge of the woods, the Menks would sneak up and insert a piece of their treasure into your baggage. If you had a bag or some trunks, they would put something into the trunk, a piece of their treasure. It could be, just a piece of rotten junk, or it could be a coin, what have you. With this trinket upon you, you would become eventually a Menk. You would develop Menk sign, and eventually you're going to be a Menk. The only way to defeat the curse of the Menk was to find their tree and burn it down. And the Menks had numerous incarnations, as I would change my mind and take this away and add this, and I had it in my head that the Menks' head they could pull their heads off and put them up in the branches so they could see passers-by from a distance, or they didn't have to have a face at all. As I continued writing the House of Bloodstein, I needed a monster. I needed something to guard Queen Ghome's far-flung empire. As a Gellar, as we mentioned before, Gellars collect a lot of stuff, a lot of arcane stuff, and the more stuff you have, the more Gellarish you are. Well, Queen Ghome has a huge empire of treasure chests and vaults and caches where she's collected her crapola over the centuries, and that's a big playground to have to guard from would-be heroes. So she had to have something to guard these places for her, because, even though she's a creepy, immortal sociopath, she can only be in one place at any given time, and even with her Bower Chest monster, it can only be in one place at any given time. So she had something to guard her back door, guard her fences, and I thought the Menks would be a great addition to the story. Not peppered with all the Menk crap, that I had created over the years with the Menk backstory, but just a toned down Menk. Problem was, when I got done penning the first draft of this and I handed it off to my beta readers, they're like, these Menks suck. They're just not tough enough. I mean, if you got these monsters who are guarding Queen Ghome's back door, guarding her playground, and all her bullshit that she's collected over the ages, you would think they'd be a little more competent, a little more formidable. And I'm looking at my draft, and I'm like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, they're just they weren't enough of a threat. So you got Phillip, Lord Phillip, and Thomasina, his new wife, formerly of Wham, Thomasina the 19th of Wham, who is a very formidable person, but she's not a killer. She's more of a street fighter with her Mount Calm club. Had it in my head, well, this club probably isn't going to work on arcane beasts like the Menk. I mean, it's probably going to have the opposite effect. Instead of knocking them out, it'll probably send them into a frenzy. So, yeah, I'm thinking Phillip and Thomasina should have a hard time. I mean, they're not. There's just the two of them. As I rewrote this and I amped the Menks up to make them suitably more tough, I'm like, man, what have I got myself into? So we'll see what you think of these creatures. And again, there's a lot to these Menks, and I'll leave a link to a little short video I did discussing the Menks that talks more about their backstory and their lore. None of that really applies here. They're just creatures guarding Queen Ghome's shit, and that's pretty much the long and short of it. So let's proceed, shall we? Part 3, Chapter 3, The Blood Box. On the other side was a spacious antechamber, thankfully free of the oppressive heaviness of the wailing room. Phillip and Thomasina took a moment to catch their breath and thank their maker for their deliverance. On the far wall was a simple door with an odd-looking palm lock to the left of the frame. Phillip opened his hand and released the whispers. They, too, seemed relieved to be out of the wailing room.
Okay, what
Welcome to the Gellartron, Sarah said. This is the place the sisters deactivated centuries ago, only to have Queen Ghome return in secret and reactivate it later. She's got some moxie, you gotta hand it to her. You're seeing a door, right? We are. Good. Philip, open the door and tell me what you see. With King and Thomasina covering him, Philip tentatively opened the door. It opened easily, squeaking slightly on its old hinges. Behind the door was a continuation of the stone wall. It's a dead end, Philip said. No. This is the Gellar door. If you don't know how to work the arcane combination lock, a solid wall is all you come up with. You could blast through the wall and find nothing but more wall. But if you know what you're doing and you put in the correct combination, then you'll gain entrance to the Gellartron. And depending on what combination you use, you'll end up in different areas of the Gellartron. Without the knowledge Kai derived from her gaming session, our journey would end right here at the Gellar door. It sounds pretty cool. I wish I could see it for myself. Check Lady Chrysania's handle. What is it doing? Thomasina looked at the brass handle gleaming in her hand. It's not doing anything. Place it on the floor. Thomasina placed the handle on the floor. Moments later, it began moving, scratching on the stone, picking up speed until it was spinning like a top. Is it spinning? Sarah asked. Yes. Good. That's what Kai said it would do. Now we hit the Gellartron. There's a complex combination lock to the left of the door. When we manipulate the lock and open the door to the correct area of the Gellartron, the handle will stop spinning and start pointing. Kai said we're looking for a blood box. I guess the Chadburn will be inside of it. Got it? Look around. You should see the lock near the left-hand side of the door. To the left of the door was an odd palm lock carved into the rock where one could place one's hand. I see it. There are 5 depressions where I can, presumably, place my fingertips, Philip said. Sarah was elated. Kai's right on the money. Place your left hand in the slot and situate your fingers. Moving your fingers in various ways will alter the lock, and the Gellar door will open into different areas in the Gellartron, if you've moved it correctly. Now, here's the thing. Kai couldn't tell us which area holds the Chadburn, so it's gonna be trial and error until we hit it. It's gonna be in that blood box thing, okay? Let's go and be on the lookout for Ghome's Menks. First, put your hand on the lock. Next, lift your pinky, lower your thumb, and then move the lock to your right. Be careful. If you mess it up even just a little, the Gellar door will open up into a trap. Queen Ghome has protected her hoard well. What kind of a trap? Thomasina asked. Kai didn't say. She just said trap. So let's assume it's a deadly trap. Therefore, Philip, don't mess it up. Philip did as Sarah instructed. He carefully situated his fingers, then slid the lock to the right, while Thomasina and King covered the door, Poltava drawn. Philip carefully swung the door open. Beyond the door was a vast, darkened room piled high with boxes and draped sheets. At first glance, there did not appear to be anywhere to walk in the room. It was a disorganized mountain of clutter piled at least 50 feet high, taking up every possible inch of floor space. King fluttered in and rose up into the heights, looking for guards or traps. See anything? Thomasina asked. King panned around with his sight. It's difficult to tell. The room is packed full of hoard. Is it a trap? Thomasina asked. King poked around amid the boxes, sheets, and crates. It does not appear to be. Is the handle still spinning? Sarah asked. It is, Philip said. Fine then. Wrong hoard. Before you close the door, we're going to defang Queen Ghome a little and burn it. Why? Thomasina asked. Queen Ghome gets her Gellar powers from all her hoards. Her sheer volume of stuff gives her power. If we destroy as much of her hoard as we can, she'll weaken. If we take out enough, she might lose her ability to get into people's heads and control the weather. So get in there and start a nice hot fire and then get out. King fluttered back through the door. "Alert!" he cried. "Menks!" Crawling about on the walls of the hoard room with a disquieting clacking sound were a number of horrific, somewhat elongated creatures. Like the blank version of Lady Chrysania, these creatures had no discernible facial features. They were motile blanks. Attached to their mannequin-like heads were elaborate crowns of interlocking metal tubing and circuitry. Tubes trailed away from the crowns and plunged into their flesh under their chins and behind where their ears would normally be. Horn-like exhaust tubes of rusty metal respirated lazy jets of humid air with a machine-like whoosh, whoosh sound. The limbs and torsos of these creatures were impossibly thin and elastic in appearance, shoulderless, hipless, jointless, as if they were made of soft putty-like flesh and had no bones under their skin. It was impossible to assign a gender to their vaguely human forms. Their flesh was dotted with festive painted-on circles of pink, blue, yellow, and green. They appeared to have no hands or feet, and said they were fitted with glittering, delicate silver gauntlets tipped with articulated fingers, crafted in Gothic finery. The same type of gauntlet Lady Chrysania had used to scratch her message into the table. The fingers were tipped with sturdy, dagger-like claws of a particularly sharp note. They also wore odd metal harnesses on their legs that wound around their calves like stout springs. Sightless and deaf, these creatures clattered about the walls like giant-sized geckos, forever guarding Queen Ghome's treasure. "Menks," Phillip said, Poltava at the ready. "Guarding the hoard." "How many?" Sarah asked. "A lot." King fluttered up, ready to attack. Thomasina drifted into the air behind Phillip, her Montcalm club poised in her hand. "Can they detect us?" she whispered. Before Phillip could respond, one of the creatures scurried in their direction, its metal fingers sparking on the walls. It clattered through the Gellar door, bold and aggressive, its metal hands raised in a fearsome fashion, but confused and somewhat apprehensive at the same time. It appeared to know Phillip, Thomasina, and King were there, but it could not pinpoint them due to the arcane power of the Whisper's veil. It moved its clawed hands about and waggled its head from side to side, metal tubes swishing through the air, collecting information. "It can't," Phillip said. The Menk moved about the room. It placed one of its metal claws on the wall and made a series of clacking sounds. A host of return clacks came from the hoard room. "Alert!" King cried. "Menks are converging." "Phillip, shut the door!" Thomasina cried. "Hurry!" Before he could get it closed, a second Menk came through, slinking across about the stony face of the walls and bounding across the floor like a dire rabbit. They attacked. Chaos. Confusion. The room was too small to create any sort of battlefront. Though there were only two Menks, they were fast and savage, the battle quickly becoming a horrendous free-for-all. Straight away, the Menks targeted the two Whispers, Bridgewater and Inn, as Thomasina had named them. Despite their lack of eyes, they flung their metal gauntlets at the Whispers with great accuracy, skewering both of them, their metal claws digging deep into the wall. "No!" Thomasina cried, seeing them killed. With the Whispers destroyed, Phillip, Thomasina, and King fell out of cloak. Their quarry exposed, the Menks chattered in excitement. Phillip took aim and fired at the nearest Menk. The shot slammed into its body, the pressure waves of each shot deforming its flesh in a grotesque fashion as blood erupted from the wound in a meaty geyser. Both hits were on target and quite mortal, but despite the blows, the Menks pressed on, attacking with blinding speed as if nothing had happened. Phillip raised his sap and formed it into a shield to ward it off. The Menk drove into the shield, clawing at it, bleeding all over it, trying to get around into Phillip. He pumped shots through the sap and into the Menk. At last, the faceless monster fell, spewing blood in vast quantities. 6 shots! Phillip boggled on it. A Poltava, though small, was powerful enough to drop a large man with just 1 shot, much less 6. All to the torso, all deadly, and the Menk just kept going. Nearby, Thomasina was in a desperate situation. The second Menk had closed in, trying to rake her with its metal claws. She had no room to maneuver, to fly, and all she was armed with was her Montcalm club, which did nothing but drive drive the Menk into a frenzy. King fluttered overhead, trying to get into position to strike the Menk, but it was in too close with Thomasina. Attacking it would probably kill her as well. It swiped at Thomasina, missing time and time again. It flung its claws, hoping to impale her against the wall, but she was too quick, evading the claws as they bit into stone, leaving the Menk with rounded stumps. The Menk slapped at her with its stumps. She ducked again and the Menk's stump hit the wall. Came a thunderous explosion, shattering rocks, stunning Thomasina, knocking her back, nearly bursting her eardrums. The Menk came at her, stumps raised. Phillip came to her aid, firing his poltava, moving the Menk away from her. Huge holes opened in its flesh. Buckets of blood poured out. Undaunted, the Menk pressed on. King came, a cloud of light, and the Menk fell. Phillip and Thomasina stood there panting, gazing at the elongated dead bodies with horror and hard-won respect. His poltava smoked. Sarah spoke up through the transponder.
"What happened? Is everybody okay? Somebody say something."
Phillip regained his wits. "We were attacked by Queen Ghome's Menk, Sarah, and it was terrible. It takes half a clip to bring down just one, and there's a whole bunch more waiting for us in the horde room." There was a confused silence from Sarah over the transponder.
"All right, wait a sec,"
she said. While they waited, Phillip checked over Thomasina. She was kneeling, holding the silvery remains of the two Whispers destroyed by the Menks. "Rose, are you all right?" Thomasina was shaken. "The Whispers are gone. I promised your mother I'd take care of them. They were a gift. She can make more. There's only one of you." She stood, King perched on her shoulder. "You fought well, Lady Blanchford," he said. "Marlis prays for you, great bird," she said. "Phillip, how are we going to do this? We have King, and he was magnificent, but just two of them were almost too much for us. What if they manage to destroy King, as they did Bridgewater and Inn? We will be overwhelmed." "I will not allow them to damage me," King replied. Sarah came back on the line.
"Okay, guys, I think I might have messed up what Kai said. Sorry, you can get even with me later, okay? She mentioned a blood box. I assumed it was literally a box somewhere in the horde where the Chadburn might be kept. I re-reviewed Kai's gaming session and cross-referenced various bits of Menk lore. It's a little cryptic, but I now think the blood box is actually a room somewhere in the horde. That's the thing with the Menks. They always have a hidden room somewhere where they keep things very important to them. What they keep in these rooms, these blood boxes, makes them vulnerable. You find it, you go in, and I think you should be able to neutralize the Menks there."
"Can we confirm this with Kai so we can make certain there are no mistakes this time?" Phillip asked.
Hey, give me a break, will you? And no, we can't ask Kai. She's still out in the IU.
King fluttered into the air. "I will go. Re-enter the combination. Let me in and close the door after me. I will discover this blood box and see what is there." "We cannot lose you, King," Thomasina said. "I will not be lost." Phillip situated his fingers in the lock and moved the pads to the correct position. "I'm ready. Rose, open the door and let him in. King, 5 minutes and we'll reopen the door. Are you ready? Don't try to be a hero, King. Avoid contact as only you can." King fluttered into the air. "Ready. Open the door. Close it behind me." "I'll go with you," Thomasina said. She opened the door to an uneasy, skittering darkness. Tapping, sparks on the walls, Menks moving around unseen. King zipped in and she closed the door. Phillip reloaded his poltava. "Sarah, keep the time. 5 minutes and we're going in."
"Right."
Thomasina was miserable with worry, staring at the Gellar door. "What is happening to him right now?"
"King can handle himself,"
Sarah said. They waited for what felt like an eternity. Phillip, curious, opened the Gellar door a crack. Stone wall. King was far away.
"Okay, that's 5 minutes," Sarah said. "Get in there and be careful."
"All right, Rose, I'm going to give you my poltava and a spare clip. When we open the door, soar up into the heights where the Menks can't get to you. I'll try illuminating the Menks with my sight. You take them out. There are 15 shots per clip. Make them count." Phillip took the poltava and the clip. She kissed him for luck and readied herself. Phillip set the lock and swung the Gellar door open. Poltava at the ready, Thomasina soared in. Phillip put the box containing Lady Cressania's parts aside and followed her. Inside was the hoard room, packed solid with a giant mountain of crates and boxes, all tenuously piled upward. Philip lit his sight, casting strong, silvery cones of light to pierce the darkness. It was difficult going for him, as there was little of any level floor space for him to traverse without having to climb on crates. It was deep silent in the hoard room. "King?" he cried out. No answer. Just silence. The room seemed to be built as a cube about 100 feet square and possibly 100 feet high, capped by a flat ceiling of ominous stone. Overhead, Thomasina floated in the center of the room, above the summit of the hoard. "King?" she called out. Philip climbed up onto some crates, feeling them shudder and shift under his weight. A Menk appeared in his sight, huddled against the wall, veiny and deathly pale, its silver claws sparkling and dug in. Thomasina saw it, took aim, and fired. It shuddered under the weight of the shot and dropped off the wall, huddled up like a dead insect, leaving its claws embedded. They discovered several more clinging to the walls. Each was dispatched with a single shot. "I see many more," Thomasina said, whirling about, "scattered about all over, either dead or very near to it." Philip tried to climb higher, but the hoard was too unsteady, ready to give way and come down around him. "Philip, let me help you," she said as she came down and lifted him into the heights. The hoard was like an artificial mountain rising up in an unsteady cone, bathed in total darkness save for Philip's sight. "Where is King?" he asked as he reclaimed his Poltava. As if in response, the hoard rumbled. A white light burst through the clutter, rising into the heights. "King!" "Good creation, King, we feared for you," Philip said. He presented himself before them. "My apologies. The Menks attacked, fast and savage, as I entered. I took down several, but there were so many. I took refuge in the depths of the hoard, making my way through the small spaces where the Menks could not easily follow. I discovered at the far end, buried deep under the hoard, a doorway which I smashed through. The doorway led to a long chamber. There I found a place of horror and pestilence which I believed to be Lady Sarah's blood box. I saw hundreds of collections of living organs, lungs, hearts, kidneys, whole systems suspended individually from hooks and bathed in vile red liquid. I believe what I saw were the vital organs of the Menks, removed from their bodies yet somehow maintained in a living condition, furnishing them with life from afar. I destroyed the organs. I destroyed them all, and the Menks fell. I heard the dull thuds of their bodies dropping into the hoard." Philip patted him on the crest. "Well done, King. Sarah, did you get all that?" She did not reply. Static snaked from the transponder. "Wherever we are, we must now be far from Castle Bloodstein. The transponder is out of range. Let's get back through the Gellar door." He took a bullet from his Poltava. "King, take this bullet and burn the hoard, as Sarah said to do." King took the bullet and winged away. Thomasina carried Philip down towards the open Gellar door, a pool of orange lights spilling out amid the darkness. As they exited, Sarah's voice popped back over the transponder.
"What happened?"
she yelled, concern heavy in her voice. They told her how King had discovered the blood box, buried deep like that at the bottom of the hoard. If we hadn't had King with us, we'd never have gotten to it. The Menks would have crushed us.
"Yep,"
Sarah said.
"Old Queen Ghome doesn't have an answer for King, does she?"
Through the door came a loud pop, followed by an eerie flickering of orange light. King rejoined them as Philip poked his head into the room. A small but rapidly growing fire danced at the base of the hoard. Several crates were already completely ablaze. Smoke reached upwards. "Again, well done, King," he says as they quickly closed the door and turned the lock. Philip opened the door again and the stone wall had returned.
"Attaboy, King. If only my mother properly appreciated how bad you are,"
Sarah said.
"Now, we're going to continue infiltrating Ghome's hoard. We're going to let King kill the Menks, and then we're going to let them burn each horde till we come up with the Chadburn. Each one of these hordes we burned, Ghome's going to get a little weaker. So let's do it.
As Sarah advised, they repeated the process at least 10 times. Philip manipulating the lock with his fingers per her instructions, the Gellartron door opening to a massive hoard of treasures, the spinning handle on the floor, releasing King into the horde and slamming the door behind him. And then, once it was all done and the Menks were dead, King setting fire to the horde using a bullet from Philip's Poltava. Knowing their weakness and being able to reach the blood box made it fairly simple. Still, there was no sign of the Chadburn, just piles of hoarded treasure and the blind deaf monsters defending them. And with that, we conclude Part 3, Chapter 3, The Blood Box. So, you see what I mean? I toughened these Menks up. There's a ton of them in there. There's a whole army of them. They only fought 2, and 2 just about kicked their butts. But I figured, okay, we need to give the Menks a weakness that they can exploit. And I came up with this blood box. I always had the notion in the creepypasta that the Menks would take their guts and put them in a jar and then bury the jar somewhere in the woods so that they couldn't really be damaged or hurt. And the only way to hurt them was to find their jar full of their guts and burn it. And then that would make them very susceptible to be killed. So I incorporated that into this story with these chambers with all their guts hanging. And if you can get to that and take out their guts, then the Menks are pretty easy to deal with. Now, visualize this, of course. You have a huge room, and it's got just a pile of treasure in it that's unsteady and about 100 feet tall. And at the very bottom of this hoard is a door. So the only way to get to it is to fish through all the bullshit to get to the door, to go in there and take out the blood box. If they didn't have King with them, small, able to fit in small places, able to get to the blood box without too much trouble, they would have been stopped here. If not in the first horde, then the second. There's just too many of these Menks. I figure each horde probably had 100 of them guarding it. Just as you saw with just 2, they're pretty rough customers. So, but you don't want to bog the story down with too much fighting. You gotta, okay, I've demonstrated how tough these guys are. Now I need to just get these heroes past them so that we keep the plot moving. And so with the thing with King and the blood box, I thought worked pretty well. I also notice, I'm with Phillip and Thomasina working together. Maybe I'm not very well read, but I don't see a whole lot of married couples adventuring together in literature and movies. Usually it's just a single person with a group of friends or comrades. It's usually never a husband and a wife. And when you do get a husband and wife combo, usually one of them is dominant by far and the other one is more there for the ride. I always reference like the Thin Man with the Nick and Nora Charles. Nick was Nora was there and she provided moral support, but it was mostly Nick who did everything. Nora was just there. I wanted Phillip and Thomasina to be equal partners, both of them contributing in their special way. And if you recall from previous books, Thomasina can fly. That's because she is evolved heavily from living in Wham, and her father was a Bondar, and so the Bondars are even more advanced. The manifestation of that is Thomasina can fly like Superman. Don't ask me how, just accept it. She can fly. So that's what she was doing. She's soaring around there, and that's going to come in handy later in the next few chapters. So Philip, Thomasina, and King are making their way through the Gellartron, and as Sarah advised, they're burning Queen Ghome's shit. And so the more stuff you get, you take away from Ghome, the less powerful she is. So you burn a bunch of these treasure hoards, you're gonna significantly weaken Queen Ghome, and that's important because she's pretty rough. Next week, we will continue the quest for the Chadburn through the Gellartron. Part 3, Chapter 4, A Familiar Prisoner. That's going to be a Kind of a doozy of a chapter. How long is it? Oh, not too bad. 20 pages. So next week, Part 3, Chapter 4, A Familiar Prisoner. We continue our quest for the Chadburn through the Gellartron. Until then, this is Ren Presents. I am your host, Ren. Peace out.